Listen up, Sugar Bottoms. As of this broadcast, as of February 26th, you have exactly 5 days to get your butts over to NorthSpokaneCBD.com to take advantage of 25% off with the discount code LIONS that they have so graciously bestowed upon our listeners. The North Spokane Hemp Company has got all of the flowers, all the tinctures, all the CBD oils, all the things that you could want that are CBD infused to take care of you, your pets, your anxieties, your aches and pains, whatever's ailing you. Go to NorthSpokaneCBD.com, promo code LIONS. Get over there now before it is too late.
Welcome to Electric Libertyland, here on the Lions of Liberty podcast, your weekly shot of culture, comedy, and liberty with your host, Brian McWilliams.
Hey, hush puppies. Welcome to the show. This is Electric Libertyland, and I am Brian McWilliams, and this is episode number 165. So if you want to go to the show notes for today's episode, which is an interview and discussion with Nick Gillespie, the editor-at-large for Reason Magazine, go to lionsofliberty.com/ELL165. Now, I am going to forgo the current event stuff this week, but I promise you I will be back next week with a rip-roaring show. This interview with Nick came at a perfect time to talk about South Park, and we get deep into some very interesting, very meta libertarian discussions about Rick and Morty and more. But we are also doing the debate recap tonight, so that will be posted, I believe, tomorrow. So set your scanners on stunned for what is sure to be a bloodletting shit show of a Democratic debate. So good timing, because I have to save my voice to do that. And of course, every time we do these debate recaps, and there's like one a week now, our listens from my show take a hit. So listen, you scroll down your podcast feed, you click Electric Libertyland, and you listen to it. I'll be damned if I'm losing listens, because we're putting out so much fantastic content for you guys, which you can support by going to patreon.com/Lions of Liberty. All right, now let's hop into it. So as mentioned, I am here with Nick Gillespie. Of course, many of you are already familiar with Nick, and a lot of you have come over actually from Reason and Nick and Matt Welch touting us on the podcast, the Reason Roundtable recently. So I want to welcome Nick Gillespie, who is editor-at-large of Reason. And of course, Nick was also managing and head editor, and you played every role imaginable at Reason, Nick. So welcome aboard, and good to have you on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Yeah, first time. I know you've been on with Mark before, but first time on Electric Libertyland, which is exciting. And, I felt it was a perfect time to have you on because, on this show, I talk a lot of current event stuff, and that kind of dominates a lot of it. But when I initially launched this show, it was supposed to talk about culture and comedy fairly equally in addition to current news, and that has fallen to the wayside. But we had an opportunity to talk about it in specific regard to South Park. As you had written a rebuttal to I guess she calls herself a journalist. She's a writer and a comedian, but a woman named Dana Schwartz, who had gone and gotten some Twitter attention for bad-mouthing South Park. And I'll do a quick read of a few of the tweets, and then I want you to give us a little bit of insight into your response and your rebuttal article. So here's Dana Schwartz's. These are 3 tweets, especially that you had mentioned in your article. So she had said, in retrospect, it seems impossible to overstate the cultural damage done by South Park, the show that portrayed earnestness as the only sin and taught that mockery is the ultimate inoculation against all criticism. My point was that South Park seemed to teach that it was always cooler to be reactionary and contrarian, and anyone who criticizes anything is offended, and that's the real problem. Wonder if that's the message those fans absorbed. And then her third tweet, people saying, quote, they make fun of everyone, unquote. That is my point. South Park is a political show, but one whose message is both sides are equally terrible, so the only correct thing to do is nothing while mocking it, all from your position of intellectual superiority. So, Nick, what about that spurred you into action? Was it purely the furor that was created, or was it something deep-seated within you, as I said, knowing that you've been a defender of the show for quite some time?
Oh, and I guess maybe I'm just reacting, because that's what South Park taught me what to do since coming on air in the late '90s. Well, there's a couple of things involved, and when I think about South Park, I think there are at least two levels in which it has been to my mind, unambiguously a social good. And again, I think it's it's the 23rd season of South Park, so this is as much a fixture in American life as, the Peanuts comic strip, which I've likened it to in the past, or Gunsmoke, or, Meet the Press. I mean, this is a true institution, and these institutions, deserve to be criticized, but that we also have to recognize why they become fixtures. And it typically is because they're striking some deep mystic chord of memory within the American population. But I think South Park works on two levels, both of which are really positive. And the first one is it's part of a series of shows, I think, that either debuted or became really defining of the 1990s in a lot of ways. And I'm thinking of shows like The Simpsons, which started in the late 80s, but also Beavis and Butthead, Mystery Science Theater 3000. They're all good examples of teaching Americans at the exact moment that we were being overloaded with entertainment options and with information because of the mainstream of cable TV, the rise of the internet, and kind of non-gatekeepered information. We went from being a society, and it's kind of embarrassing to even talk about this stuff because I forget that a lot of people just don't have an experience or a memory of a time where you couldn't get all of the information, basically all of the information that you want at your fingertips. And that when I was growing up, I was born in 1963, so I'm like a very late baby boomer. And for most of my life and early adulthood, at least, the problem was not too much information; it was too little information. And I think about that a lot in the cultural arena. Forget about economics or politics or something like that, or learning how to shopping for a car. You couldn't get any real independent information about what a car cost, the dealer who was selling it to you, et cetera.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, my God, the amount of time I remember growing up, and I'm about 10 years younger than you. So I still remember the days of, my family didn't have a modem in the house, until I was 18 or something. So
right.
Yeah, I had the same experience, but I remember thinking to myself, as the generations go on, my grandfather would still go, to dealership or to TV store to TV store, shopping for that best deal, even when that era did come around where you could go online and shop. And I remember thinking, what is his time worth? But it is just that people did not have that experience and they were more comfortable with that. So, to your point, it was far more difficult, and you did not have anywhere near the amount of information to compare and contrast things as you do today.
Well, and in turn, I think a lot about it because I used before I became a political journalist, I was a music kind of like an entertainment journalist or reporter. And, growing up in the 70s and for most of the 80s, you couldn't get information about your favorite bands. Not even like when did their albums come out? What was their full discography? Who played on what, et cetera. Like, it was just really hard to get any basic information about stuff. And in the 90s, because of cable, because of the internet, because of the breakdown of kind of mainstream gatekeeper cultural institutions, we had this massive, flood, a Johnstown flood of information and of sources and of things to pick through for the first time. So we went from being in a kind of famine to this incredible rich feast. And what shows like South Park did is that they taught you, on a very fundamental level that that most information that you get is self-interested. It is either, explicitly trying to sell you something or implicitly that the people who are providing it don't even understand their own biases and their own kind of prejudices or their inability to really give you a broad perspective about what's going on. And I think you see again and again that that's one of the main functions of a show like South Park, and it's done it phenomenally, is that it forced all of us to kind of reckon with that, whether it is politicians or celebrities or businessmen. Again and again, in episode after episode, you see the characters grappling with, having too much information, all of which might sound perfectly well, or all of which is complete horse manure. but people, act as if it's legitimate and unbiased and things like that. So on one very fundamental level, I think South Park is one of those shows, and this is why it's still popular and why it's still kind of in the firmament, is that it taught us how to deal with competing truth claims, with oddball assertions, with a world in which you as an individual or, one of the characters, oftentimes it's Stan or Kyle, but they know something is wrong and everybody else is either in on the con or they are blinded by
they bought into the whatever the new mania is going through the news cycle, and they do a fantastic job of that painting. I mean, Randy obviously is the poster boy for this on the show. Stan's father always buys into whatever is going on out there, and always is the first person to want to get the troops together and go march on something. But South Park did give us a BS filter and a mirror at the same time. It's a fine combing to figure out what is pertinent to you and what should be believed or questioned. And that's one of the things that kind of bothered me about Dana Schwartz is saying that calling everything, making fun of everything, and becoming a nihilist is something to be ashamed of. And while I don't think South Park is nihilistic, you do need to have that certain take a step back from yourself and realize, look, there are motives behind the news coming at us. There are motives behind our own actions and everyone else's actions. And it is, in fact, a universal good to be able to witness that and say, okay, you know what, I'm kind of seeing the shades here on what's coming at me, and I'm able to filter my perspective accordingly.
Yeah, and then on the second level is this question of does revealing things, does kind of pouring acid over every belief system, whether it's environmentalism or Mormonism or foodism or whatever, because in episode after episode, some of the most cherished beliefs of the individual characters just get revealed as silly or hokey. Does that result in a lack of involvement or investment in the community or anything approaching nihilism? And I think one of the things that the show, and this almost reduces it to I was going to say to a cartoon, it obviously is, but kind of cartoon parable, but again and again, it's that the characters come face to face with something, and what they believe in is revealed as untrue, and that doesn't mean that they give up or just mock stuff. It actually, they continue to live and love and learn in a way that and early on it would be typically again Stan or Kyle kind of reciting a parable of what they learned in the in this episode or in this 30-minute show. But they again come back, again and again to the same messages, which is that being honest, being empathetic, being nice, having love and feeling, and charity for your common man, and also recognizing, that people's behavior is separate from their intentions, both good and bad. This is one of the most profoundly moral shows, and I think it spurs people to action rather than inhibits them from that. And, when we look at this, it's, and something that I agree with, that Schwartz said, was that she wasn't sure if she could blame the creators of a show for the way that she perceives her audience to act. I mean, I think that's totally true. As a producer, as a writer, as a creator, as a the maker of something, you put it out into the marketplace, commercial or intellectual, ideological, whatever, and then people make of it what they will. But over the course of South Park's lifespan, people, and particularly younger people, and I would argue particularly men and young men, have become much more open and involved and vulnerable on a certain level. One of the things that, again, feeling like an old man here, is that how much there are extremes, of course, and cancel culture is part of this, and social media may or may not play into it, or at least give it voice. There are people who shout down everything, but the fact is that people are so much nicer and kinder, I think, in general in America, and certainly outside of the arena of politics. Politics is getting harsher and more polarized, and people, I think, are arguing in bad faith or without a recognition that they could ever be wrong in something that they have a commitment to. But South Park, has helped create a different way of being in the world, which I think is particularly good. And I think it's particularly good for young men who were, traditionally not expected to have emotions, not expected to show remorse, not expected to be particularly self-critical. I am old enough to have grown up in an era when, smart men, smart boys, genius boys grew up into smart genius men who, were never to be questioned or were rarely to be questioned. And that isn't the way the world is anymore. And I think, South Park in many ways exemplifies that, and it helped deconstruct the myth of authority, the myth of genius, the myth of the true believer, kind of brought to mass market. So
yeah, and you think
that's my spiel. Partly about why South Park as it's part of commercial culture, it's popular culture, it's art, and it performs, I think, a profound social function that we should be celebrating.
Well, without a doubt, question everything is something that, it seems like especially that was always the culture coming up for these younger generations, question everything, and even now you see, especially people on the left saying that the youth are the ones who will lead us on this way. And the show really pushes that concept of question all authority. And, by virtue of extending that and saying if someone is more on the feminist bent, and I might be projecting Dana Schwartz, but she wrote an entire book, what was the name of her book? The White Man's Guide to White Male Writers of the Western Canon. So I think she probably tends to go towards the feminist side of things. But you would think that a show that has encouraged questioning everything of taking down the male authority figures, as you had mentioned, or taking down the male genius figures, or taking down just a general authoritarian system, which by de facto, it would be a patriarchy per the feminist mindset anyway, that it would be appreciated, especially in the way that they do try to position people so that they take another point of view. I think South Park does an excellent job of putting people in the other side of an argument and saying, half the time South Park, they start with one position and they end up completely flip-flopping by the end of the episode in a comedic fashion. So showing the two sides, you'd think that it would have more sympathy from people that are trying to challenge authority or trying to challenge the patriarchy or whatever it might be.
I agree with that, and I think South Park is also exemplifies a concept which I admittedly have not really fully thought through. But let me try it out on you. And
this is the place to do it. Throwing crap against the wall is all I do for an hour every week.
Okay, so we've all heard or we know the concept of ironic distance. That when and it's related to gallows humor. It's when things are so bad, you make a joke to kind of evacuate the scene of discomfort or of tragedy or darkness.
And South Park has had that. They had like the 10-year anniversary of, I think it was 9/11 or something, that they said on the episode, they go, well, we can finally joke about 9/11, everybody, and they had confetti.
Right. And, I think there's another concept that has been at work in American culture in a pretty strong way, at least since the mid 1980s. And I would call it something like ironic nearness, which is that instead of trying to get out of a situation of abstracting yourself emotionally or cognitively by making a joke or by saying, oh, well, I don't really believe that anyway, there's a way of joking about stuff that keeps you in the situation, that allows you to stay, in the kitchen when it gets really hot. And I actually think that's what South Park is doing again and again, that it by joking, it is not by joking about things that are sacrosanct and holy to all people, to many people, including the creators of the show and including the audience of the show. It's not distancing us from all of that. It's allowing us to kind of stay in that moment and, keep our hands on the hot stove longer than we would otherwise. And I think you see this in, it often gets, that kind of attitude or that kind of temperament gets mistaken for a kind of nihilism or a blankness. And a void that I don't think is there. You see it in things like, ESPN when it started as a sports network in the 80s. It had an ironic kind of sensibility about the people it obsessed over. It was the first time in sportscasting or in, kind of sports reporting, which was always, kind of dumb and lunkheaded, but super serious and super sober. You never made fun of Mickey Mantle, and you never made fun of these modern day gods who were man children, et cetera. And ESPN changed the way we thought about that, and they were super fans. And this is also true of rock music. And when you think of all of the, something even like SpongeBob SquarePants, where like you can make fun of rock music even as you are absolutely immersed in it and love it to death. one of the things that is great about South Park, and I would extend this to the entire oeuvre of Matt Stone and Trey Parker, is that they are so great at parodying things, not because they hate them, but because they love them. Whether it's Broadway musicals and have the whole Book of Mormon, which is not simply a critique of Mormonism, that is actually an embrace of what they see as its central, urgent message about being good and loving people, but the form of Broadway. And in Team America, the opening production number of the Rent style play that's in that where everyone has AIDS is phenomenal because it's so perfectly, like the only person who could write and produce and execute such a perfect parody of a Broadway show is somebody who loves them, to their absolute to the subatomic level. And, that's a place where we are in American popular culture. And I think it's a better place to be than the old way where you could not make fun, you could not play with, you could not question the forms and formats of, whether it's sports or politics or art or whatever. You just had to kind of either distance yourself from it or hate it or not participate. And, we're in a world now, and I think South Park exemplifies this, of where we have this kind of ironic nearness, and it's better. It extends conversations. It doesn't shut them down. And that's, again, one of the things where I think a lot of critiques of shows like South Park miss the, they just miss the boat.
Hey, everybody, let's pop out for a quick second to give a shout out to another libertarian podcast, which we are fans of here. They are supporters of our program and great guys, Nate and Charlie over at Good Morning Liberty. They believe in a simple truth. You own yourself. Your inherent right to life, liberty, the pursuit of meaning, and they believe that free market capitalism saves the world. They are sarcastic, they're rational, they're objective, they're pretty damn funny, and they are an every day of the week podcast. So when you're jonesing for a fix between Electric Libertyland and Felony Friday, I hope that you will definitely check them out, hit that subscribe button. They also have a message that's more compassionate, guys. They want to change the libertarian message from selfishness to one of compassion. We are libertarians because we want to help people. And these are two guys that have some very specific insight as well into the healthcare industry. They have their own healthcare IT company that they founded. So a lot of great insight there, guys. Check them out. New podcasts every day of the week. Just search for Good Morning Liberty on the podcast app of your choice, or go to lol.gmlpodcast.com. Again, lol.gmlpodcast.com for a quick link to everything they got going on. All right, check them out. Well, I would hope that we are right in that saying this ironic nearness is something that is more pronounced now, because one of my biggest problems right now within just dialogue, and obviously political discourse is conquering everything at the moment. It's hard to talk about even a television show that's apolitical, and it has nothing to do with without somehow getting politics involved and reading into it. Yeah, right. And so I would hope that this kind of ironic nearness plays a role. And like you said, being able to joke about topics that are of the utmost serious to try to break down walls. I mean, I was speaking at Matt Walsh was there as well, but at the California Libertarian Convention, and I did just a brief talk that I put together, but basically on how libertarians need to try to use comedy to try to take comedy back in a way, but to forward conversations. Because so often, when it comes to these deep-seated beliefs and whether or not they are reasonable, or if they are the cause du jour, as South Park always mocks, trying to get people to listen to what you're saying is so difficult, and maybe having a bit more of that ironic nearness, as you put it, to be able to go, look, this is a little funny. Can we both laugh at this and then forward that conversation rather than just screaming at each other and shutting down completely?
I agree. And, to keep it kind of trained inward, to the libertarian movement, which, we're all a part of, and I suspect most of your audience as well.
Yep.
Libertarians need to be able to laugh at their own excesses, I think, and we need to, and again, it's not to not believe anything, but rather to kind of acknowledge, that we can be ridiculous kind of versions of ourselves, and how can we, lighten up a little bit so that we can at least begin to have a conversation about the things that really profoundly disturb and divide us.
Yeah. Well, one of my key jokes in many of the talks I do is I go to the audience and I tell them to say, look to your left, look to your right, look behind you. nobody likes any of you. And it's kind of like that old
Right.
collegiate professor thing, one of you will fail this class. But it is true, and it always gets a laugh because at the end of the day, we are a pretty ordinary bunch of assholes. And the better we know ourselves, the better we're going to be able to communicate with other people that we know see us that way. So we need to start to chip away at that and be maybe a little bit more self-deprecating, I think would really come in handy for the average libertarian out on the street.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question about that. And also, I think part of what has been happening over the past 30 years or so, in a big way, in a profound way, and I think most of us live this and we get this implicitly, but perhaps not in all circumstances. But because of what I would argue is a rise in the level of education and the rise of a kind of disposable income, and especially in technological innovation, the distance between the kind of high priest and congregant has shrunk, between the creator and the consumer, producer and consumer, creator and audience member and all of that. And the gulf has shrunk, and also the stage has been lowered so that we're all kind of in the same mosh pit, so to speak. And, that calls for a different type of communication, and it's one that is much less based on hierarchy and status or even expertise, and saying, look, I have all the answers. Now shut up and listen to me,
right,
and follow what I say. Rather, we demand this, from the people we see who used to be high up in our lives, whether it's a college professor, a priest, a doctor, a lawyer, we treat them more like they are our employees now. And I think that's good and right. And generally speaking, that's completely beneficial that, authority has been deconstructed and demystified. Which is good. And we also all as individuals, I think, feel more empowered to question authority, but also to assert that we have some, knowledge, especially about our own lives, and that, we want to have dialogues rather than monologues. I think as libertarians, we need to think about that. The idea here is not merely to express our, the purest form of our beliefs that we can in every situation. It's rather to persuade, and that, persuasion and dialogue are, those two things go together. You're rarely going to persuade somebody by hectoring them or by, telling them off the bat that you are completely insane and stupid, socialistic, authoritarian, nihilist, whatever. And, to the extent that humor helps with that, to the extent with a healthy form of self-deprecation, or self-examination, and also speaking for oneself rather than projecting the truth onto everybody around you. I think these are all good things. I am, I'm excited, as sickened as I am by the kind of state of politics now, and to the extent I like, and I know we're going to be talking about Rick and Morty, so we'll be talking about the multiverse timelines and things like that. But, it's like, what kind of world did we wake up in where it looks like the general election may be between Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders? It's, like, this is, this isn't this isn't the timeline I chose. But to get through that, and, and as you were saying, politics has taken over everything. I mean, it is just, that somebody left a lid off the bottle of bleach and it's just pouring out all over everything and kind of ruining things. We need to be able, I guess what I'm getting at is that, I actually think that libertarianism, properly understood or in a general way is a very powerful, positive, engaging, inclusive vision of how to get through life, and enjoy yourself and live in a healthy, prosperous, fun, fair world. And so, I'm kind of excited over, in the near future, because even as, I think, I know whoever wins in November will likely be the worst president in American history, and I feel like we're coming off in the 21st century. We've just been setting records for terrible president after terrible president after terrible president. And I don't see that ending anytime soon. But I think the silver lining might be that people are finally going to be forced to kind of consider the alternative, to consider the idea that instead of putting more power into failed institutions and systems of authority and power, maybe we act more like we're each in control of our own lives, and we should be demanding more control over the choices that matter most to us. So, in that sense, I think, again, South Park South Park ends up being kind of a helpful guide as well as a prod and an inspiration and an aspiration.
Yeah. Well, it is fascinating that we've got Donald Trump and most likely Bernie Sanders in an information age, right? We're talking about how there's information at our fingertips. We have all of this, we can easily research and find out. And yet these are the two we end up with all of the information in the world. These two idiots is who are going to be vying to run the most powerful country or nation on the planet. It just is mind-boggling. And to your point about libertarianism coming into play here, I also have hope for the future, not necessarily this election cycle, although I do think that probably it looks like Hornberger will be the candidate right now, and I do think he's an effective communicator, but more so in a broader scale of because we can expose these people so easily, because the two parties are being exposed. I mean, the underhanded dirty tricks, the behind the scenes, Bernie Sanders, I'm excited. I'm going to watch the debate tonight. And I'm excited to see these people turn on Bernie Sanders. They're going to bleed him out with leeches and knives and everything else because they're going to expose the underbelly of what they don't want everybody to see, which is they are essentially the same. They both are power mongers. And once people see that, and you're seeing it with the Bernie bros, right, coming around to see, being called Nazis and having all these people go off on them, that I think they will look to a third alternative. And unlike with Ron Paul, who of course inspired me, but I think that was an example, as was Donald Trump, of people, a certain amount of those supporters were simply anti-establishment. I think finally the wall will have crumbled down enough where people go, you know what, I'm not just anti-establishment, but I want real solutions. It's not enough to just say hell no anymore.
Yeah, I agree. Because what we don't need a God, this is awful, and it was even before my day, but it still persists. The Who song, and now I'm having a senior moment. Of meet the new boss, same as the old boss.
Yeah.
Don't get fooled again.
Right.
That what we're coming to, I think culturally, I hope, is a recognition that swapping in new leaders with the same system intact, basically the same systems of power isn't good enough. What we need is a different structure, and that we need one that to talk kind of in internet sense is one that is more networked rather than one that is more kind of broadcast or hierarchical, like where each person in the system has more control over the information and choices that they make in every possible direction, as opposed to just taking over the machine. And it's like, oh, well, the elevator will run smoother or faster or more efficiently if I'm the one punching the buttons or pulling the levers. No, we need to get off of that elevator and create a new system for going up and down or however we want to get around in a building. And I think it's understandable why Trump and Sanders, and it's not just Sanders, I mean throughout the Democratic Party, he might be the purest titration of something, but most of the Democrats are kind of talking about in a similar way to him of doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on institutions and ideas and policies that were created in the 20th century, in some cases, I think with some of the Social Security stuff in the late 19th century even. But, both Sanders and Trump are profoundly backward looking, and they're trying to control they're trying to control a decentralized network world in which there are lots of different power centers and they're constantly shifting. They're trying to control and modulate all this with a bunch of tools that haven't been effective in decades and just are not native to this, to this century. So they're going to fail. And I think, one of the reasons why, somewhat okay with the way things are shaking out in the major party level is that you're going to see two pure kind of instances or instantiations of old backward-looking models of governance, one on the right and one on the left. And I think that opens up the possibility for libertarians to, get more of a hearing. I, generally speaking, I have over the course of my time, and I've been at Reason now for something like 26 years, I've become I've become more convinced that libertarian is, it's more of a direction, it's more of an adjective, it's more of a sensibility or a temperament than it is a kind of concise set of policies or positions on certain things. And I think as long as, I think more people are getting fed up with a kind of right-wing variant and a left-wing variant of I'm going to be able to save you, or, just follow what I say and we'll punish our enemies, and, do what I say and we'll all be good. And people are more interested in kind of individualizing, their lives, and what are the systems, whether it's cultural, whether it's political, whether it's economic, et cetera, that allow for that. And those solutions are inherently, I think, libertarian. They're about giving more choice and more autonomy and more possibilities to individuals and less to these aggregated power centers, whether it's the federal government or, particular corporations that often work hand in fist with the government.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, the corporate, I think people are starting to see at least the overlay in big government and corporatism. But also, you hit on an interesting concept, and, talking about libertarianism as a guiding core principle, a moral compass more than a political entity or political party. Maybe we just need to be a church. Maybe we should forget all of this other nonsense and just become the Church of Liberty, right? And in that way, we can forward these moral compasses along. People don't have, people can take them and roll them out in whatever organizations they see fit, whatever parts of life they see fit. But either way, it will be the guiding light, and the society will be the better for it.
Yeah, and I do like the the metaphor, the analogy you use there of a compass, because that also. One of the things I think that has happened as I think Republicans and Democrats, liberals, conservatives, progressives, and libertarians too, like as things have become more polarized, we've all become much more brittle and kind of demanding and pissy in the way that we define our ideology. And it pains me when libertarians, you get 9 out of 10 of whatever a person says. These are the 10 most important issues to be a libertarian. You get 9 out of 10, and it's like, I'm sorry, but you've been voted off the island. Not pure enough. And which isn't to say that anything can be libertarian, but we need to be thinking about how do we engage more people, and how do we reset kind of the compass or orient the map so that we're moving towards more freedom rather than less freedom.
Yeah. Well, it's a good segue into talking about Rick and Morty. And I'll give you a couple different things to think about here. I mean, one is, in a broader sense, and this has always fascinated me about Rick and Morty, which I have said is one of the most libertarian shows on television, which is amazing considering the fact that the people, Justin Raimondo and I've got a blank on, and Matt Harmon, are some of the. There's not Raimondo. You're
not Justin Raimondo.
I always do that. I do the anti-war. It's Justin Roiland.
Yes.
I always sub in now past rest in peace editor of Anti-War. But Matt Harmon or Dan Harmon, pardon me, and Justin Roiland are two of they're absolute leftists. They're progressive leftists, but yet Rick and Morty as a whole, at its core, has some of the most libertarian values you'll ever see in mass media. You've got Rick, he is a individual through and through. He absolutely does not want to be controlled, wants to, as you said, rejects the systems that are in place. And on another level, one thing I took away from the episode that I tweeted about when we were discussing back and forth on this, setting it up, in the episode, the Rick Shank Redemption, I think it's called, is the one where he brings down an entire government by, number one, destroying their fiat currency and changing it to zero because it's not hard backed by anything. And number two, the Citadel of Ricks. I want to get your take on this, because the Citadel of Ricks is this commune of all Ricks from all different galaxies, right? But yet they still have governance. And at the end of the day, they're still effed up. So does that teach us the lesson, whether it's cognitive or not, in the minds of Dan and Justin? Do they acknowledge that no matter who is leading us in these systems, it's still going to be corrupted and it's still going to be broken?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also think, I guess it's the final episode of season 3, where there's an Obama character. And that episode is a critique of specifically of Obama foreign policy, but also kind of arrogance and the pretense of knowledge, to use F.A. Hayek kind of language on that. I think, what you see in that show, and this, again, I mean, it's interesting to talk about, what I know very little about the creators of the show, and in a way, I don't care for the reasons I kind of sketched out before. Once you create something and you put it out there, it's for the world to interpret.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes what individual readers say it is, or it means what individual consumers or groups of consumers say it means in some profound way. But the very idea of the multiverse, which that show is kind of is predicated upon, it forces us to realize that all of our choices, whether they're good choices or bad choices, one's made in ignorance or one's after studying something and expertise, are subject to revision and to change as more knowledge becomes available, and that there is always unintended consequences to all of our actions, but that there are always options, and that we should, we're never fully finished as an individual or a society. We always can learn from taking other perspectives and thinking things through. To me, that is a profoundly, small L libertarian insight, and it shares. We're in a kind of golden age. If the idea of ironic nearness makes any sense, I think we're also living in a kind of Philip K. Dick universe, the science fiction novelist
one of my favorites.
Whose first novel, Man in the High Castle, was made into what I thought was a tremendous show that really was very different and ultimately, I think, better than his early 60s novel of the same name.
Right, on Amazon Prime, right?
Yeah, which just concluded, or I think the show dropped last season. It's fine, or recently at the end of the series. But it takes place in a future where the Axis has won World War II, but fundamentally, what it talks about are the possibility of different timelines that people in one reality can kind of learn about and actually go to and bring back knowledge and mindsets and even technology from these other universes. That comes up again and again and is played for laughs in Rick and Morty, but it is, it is this paean both to, kind of free will and autonomy and the, never settling for the situation you find yourself in, as well as recognizing the contingency of all that we know and hold dear, that it can go away automatically, that it is, that we always are in a process of building and changing and revising and getting closer. And to me, and this might be getting too meta, this all, it strikes me as very similar to the way that the Austrian School of Economics talks about markets, and not just commercial markets, but markets in knowledge, where we're constantly, what we know to be true, absolutely true, metaphysically true, gets revealed the next minute as something that is completely erroneous or just irrelevant to how we live today. So,
I love that you're tying these two together, by the way. I hadn't thought about that, but that is a absolutely brilliant point. And that, the systems that we're putting into place, absolutely, when we see how humans actually interact, completely fall apart. So how dare we presume to plan ahead in such a manner with so many other people's money?
Right. Well, and that's for sure. But there's also that, the fact, and this shows up in like every episode, because Rick is always like, we gotta, we have a mission, we have something that we absolutely have to do and stop or create or whatever. Is that all of this living in a kind of contingent world or a contingent universe that may not even be the real one, that defines us, we still have to act. So, as I was growing up, I stumbled probably first into existentialism by Albert Camus and The Stranger and his later works. Before kind of becoming formally introduced to kind of libertarian political ideas and things like that. But the two seem to me to be somewhat related. And, again, this might be a real hop, skip, and a jump through a wormhole to pop up in, places like South Park and Rick and Morty. But, that we both know that every decision that we're making is incomplete and is going to be completely at some point revealed to be foolish or wrong or erroneous or dangerous or harmful, but that we also must act all the time knowing all of that, and that, what are some of the implications of that? And it is, that when you have empathy, when you try to do the right thing, when you try to, for yourself, you own yourself and your own decisions, but you do try to cause as little damage and harm to other people. These are all things that I think are, kind of profoundly and deeply libertarian with a small L. And these are ultimately the pre-political, pre-partisan, certainly messages that we need to be selling at a time like this. I Hell, like I can remember dying, as a kid, thinking about what is the 21st century going to be like. And it's, on a certain level, it has far outstripped any of my imagination. Just the idea that we're talking about shows that we watch, via, personal, computers that fit into our pocket and that we watch at any time and any place. The world is just a world of marvels and inventions that keep getting better and better. That's all great. And I couldn't imagine most of the shit that we take for granted.
Oh yeah.
And on another level, it's like, my God, we are debating Medicare for all. We're debating a Bismarckian, like maximizing a Bismarckian welfare state 150 years after it was created, and 50 years after any country has been able to figure out a way to pay for it over the long haul. It's and where you have somebody like Donald Trump, who is a rock-ribbed Republican now, pushing through, government-funded, child
care for everyone. Yeah,
talking about never touching Social Security and Medicare, which is an old Reagan trope. Who was a Republican who called himself a New Deal Democrat. On the other hand, you have universal benefits for everything at the precise moment. That we can't even. We're giving more and more money, free money, away to old people who are the rich, among the richest people in American society. Like, none of this adds up. I mean, politically, we're really, in the swamp. I think technologically and in many other ways, and around the globe, we're actually doing pretty well. People are being, markets are winning a kind of lived liberalism of government receding and individuals and voluntary exchange actually taking over. I'm bowled over by the fact that in 2018, according to the Brookings Institution and demographers at the UN and elsewhere, for the first time, 50% or more of the world's population lived at middle class or higher standards. Like,
wow, yeah.
I can remember all of the talks of how there were going to be mass famines because we couldn't feed people, and there were going to be die-offs because of war and all of this kind of stuff. We are in many ways in a fantastic world if we would only recognize it. And at the same token, we have so much, we're barely in the beginning of a voyage through a long intestine that, we got a lot of way to go. And I do think though that broadly speaking, as well as in many specific applications, libertarian ideas and libertarian policies are the way forward.
I would agree, and I know we got to wrap it up here because I know you have to jump off in about 10 minutes. But one thing I wanted to key on is, we talk about information being so available. We talk about people rising out of poverty and how the middle class is growing, and how the world's population that is in poverty is at its all-time low. We've got all this information. We've got all this. Maybe is it a question of having too much information at times, wherein we are now so inundated with the bad in the world and rarely the good, except maybe on looking at someone's curated Instagram feed showing only the best vacations they go on. But are we now looking and saying, oh, we're so afraid, not you and I, of course, but the broader we of society, that we are so afraid that now we're turning towards more government because there's so much more to fear out there. Who will protect us? That's one question. And then the second question I have, well, actually, go answer that first. So take too long.
Part of one of the things that's fascinating are the kind of disconnects between how people view their personal lives or their personal situations and broader kind of social trends. And so in the United States, if you look at Gallup or Pew or anybody who tracks these things, a majority of people, or a plurality of people at the very least, will say that the country is headed in the wrong direction. But then a majority of people, and a super majority of people, will say that their own situation seems to be better, and they haven't had this much confidence in the future, in decades and things like that. So there's that kind of weird disconnect. I wrote a story for Reason about a year ago or so. It's up at reason.com somewhere, but about how low trust societies reliably call for the government, low trust societies that know that, everything around them is corrupt, especially the government that is designed to set up rules and protect people. Like in low trust cultures, societies, states, nations, where people know that the government is just crooked and corrupt, nonetheless reliably vote for more government power to regulate and structure their economy and kind of clean up the mess. Yeah, it is. And, and I've argued that the United States is actually going from a high trust society to a low trust society. If you looking at places like Gallup that have been tracking this stuff for half a century or more, in almost all major institutions of life, including big business, including the government and the various parts of government, things like charities and whatnot, more people believe that, these institutions are not, they don't really act well in most instances. Yet we are calling for more government. And I actually think from a libertarian point of view, we need to take this correlation and possibly a causation seriously, that we have won the message as libertarians of saying that, government is incompetent at best and is like downright corrupt. At worst. We've won that message. Most people kind of agree with that. They're skeptical of power, especially government power. And yet we're surprised that people want more government, that we, as a society, we're voting for more and more control and regulation. The size, scope, and spending of government keeps going up. And I talked to a bunch of economists and political scientists, and they said, well, when you feel like the world is rigged, when the system around you is rigged, there's a human tendency to want a strong man, a kind of despot who will, not just pay you off, but actually clean the stables a little bit. And I think there's some truth to that. And it makes me think, that libertarianism needs a slightly different messaging, which is that we need to be able to show spots where, and again, I'm not an anarchist, and, we can argue about, what is libertarianism versus anarchism and everything, but I don't have a problem with a strictly, with a limited government that does fewer things. It should definitely be doing many fewer things, but does them pretty well, and also devolves power in all the policies, should be predicated upon the idea of how do we get more power into the hands of individuals to make the decisions that matter most in their lives, whether we're talking about, their healthcare, their education, their retirement, whatever. But I think we need to think about what are the essential tasks that we're asking government to do, and then how do we, showing where the government can do those efficiently or has done those efficiently. And I actually think restoring a little bit of trust and faith and confidence in government might be a way, counterintuitively, to getting to a place where people can relax and feel they don't need the government to do everything because they have more confidence and trust in their fellow citizens.
That is an interesting way to go about it. It definitely is counterintuitive, but I can see what you're saying as far as manipulating people's fears and trying to push the needle the other direction. I mean, it also is kind of funny that talking about that strong man coming in and talking about somebody that's going to, Trump ran on drain the swamp. That is the strong man you describe is what got elected. And Bernie Sanders is that in a different fashion, going after the corporate elitists and the billionaires and the millionaires, so people are looking for that without a doubt.
Yeah, and Trump, whatever else you can say about him, and I'm not a hysteric about Trump. I know a lot of libertarians who are super anti-Trump. I know some who it strikes me as bizarre that are very pro-Trump, and I'm sure you get a lot of this where people are like, "How can you be against Trump?"
I say somewhat ironically that he is maybe quite factually the best president of my lifetime. And I can defend that statement pretty thoroughly because they've been so terrible. All of them are terrible.
That is the soft bigotry of low expectation, right?
Exactly.
But on a certain level, like the one thing that we do know is he's spending under his watch or since he's become president has gone up. By something like 10 or 11% per capita. We're spending, I wrote about this last week, we're spending something like $1,441 more per person now than when Trump, right before Trump took office. And, and then you immediately get all the Trump bots saying, oh, well, the president doesn't really control spending, blah, blah, blah. And it's like you get into these horseshit diverse arguments. But, the fact of the matter is that the size, scope, and spending of government continues to grow. We are also doing things that are just egregious, like, borrowing more and more money. We have more and more federal debt. I liken, what we're doing now, it's government by Groupon, where we're essentially one out of every $4, and it's actually getting more than that, but, one out of every $4 the government spends is borrowed. So, you're saying to citizens, like, here for 75 cents, you can get $1 worth of something. Of course, the smart move is to be like, yeah, I don't need 8 gallons of ice cream, but you're giving it to me at 75 cents on the dollar. Of course, I'm going to buy more. In a weird way, and I don't want to see taxes go up, especially to cover current government spending. But if people understood the actual cost of the government that they're getting, they would demand less of it because it's not worth it. And, the more that we clarify that government spending has absolute costs in the here and now, but also down the road. I mean, large persistent deficits, large and growing national debt is highly associated with long-term economic slower growth. This is something that Marxist economists at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, as well as market-friendly people, all agree on. We need to make these kind of things that are kind of either in the distance or are unseen. We have to make those seen, the costs of government in all of its forms. And I think we'd be able to get a consensus on people saying, we're like a pretty rich society here, and we can afford to do less, to ask the government to do less, give them less, and focus that more on, the things and the people that matter and that need help, rather than just kind of, and this is where what's problematic to me about the current, presidential race is on the Democratic side, it's just, we're going to give you, 10 times more than you're already getting, or 100 times more. And then Trump is somewhere playing, footsie with all sorts of things where, and also taking away basic things like consumer choice, the ability of people to, decide where they want to live and, and other things. And, we need a reset. I think everybody knows that, we are living in a sitcom that is not working. It needs a complete reboot. And I'm hopeful that because we have two, at this point, and again, it may or may not be Bernie Sanders. We'll have a much better sense of that over the next couple of weeks. But, we have two extreme versions of kind of the reigning orthodoxy of the past 50 or 60 years. Turnout, fewer people want to be identified as Republicans and Democrats.
Right.
These guys might be, you have to reach bottom before you can really kind of recover. And I do think it's good that, the further and the more extreme that Trump and Bernie Sanders becomes, it leaves more people in the middle, and I think more people prone to thinking about libertarian ideas. Do you want to have more freedom to figure out how to live your life. And again, to tie it back into kind of South Park and and Rick and Morty and whatnot is, we recognize there are many, many different ways to live. We accept, individualization and mass personalization in every aspect of our lives. We demand it in every aspect of our lives, except our politics. And hope, we're inching towards that final, kind of final showdown.
Well, hopefully. I mean, AOC, one of the few things she said that was correct was questioning why she and Bernie Sanders were in the same party. And obviously, that is a good example, as is Ron Paul being part of the GOP when he ran. And one thing I will say, and again, I know we have 1 minute left, so I'll be very brief and then let you finish up by telling everybody everywhere to go to find you and find everything you're doing with reason. But, playing into hitting rock bottom, allowing people to bounce up, taking advantage of an opportunity to educate, it does seem that I'm intrigued by the concept of getting people to look at ways in which government's working. But at the same time, I would like to see, because I'm more on the anarchist side of things, but I would like to see the Libertarian Party also look for more solution-based approaches, because we're always the people, the old man with the stick yelling, slow down. But I want to see more solutions to these problems. And, to use Obama's cheesy phrase of yes, we can, yes, we canner, let's a way that we can do this more effectively than government and put away those fears of people who question who will build the roads and all these other idiotic, objections when we have solutions, but we need to show success stories.
Yeah, I agree. And we need to have a positive vision, which is difficult because there is no one, preferred libertarian solution to anything, or especially, especially how to live. I mean, the whole idea is that you have life and liberty and you can pursue happiness as you define it. But I do think in certain things, we can show positive, policies that can reduce spending and increase choice. Something like the school choice movement, and if you take that broadly defined, I think like a lot of libertarians, In my heart of hearts, I would like to see the state out of any kind of educational role, but by the same token, the idea of robust school choice, whether we're talking about charter schools or private voucher programs or homeschooling or whatever, we have this embarrassment of riches of people doing all kinds of models at fractions of the price of a traditional, conventional public school education, K through 12, and even through college, which embodies choice. And that's one of the reasons why people remember college more fondly than high school or something. But we can point to that and showcase the varieties of ways in which people are allowed to kind of figure out what they want and seek it out and kind of deliver on it. I think that we can also do that with, the way that voluntary solutions in the marketplace have done phenomenally to just improve our quality of life. And that includes, looking at, the way that a grocery store or supermarket like Whole Foods has not only changed the way that we shop and what we expect out of a grocery store, but it's changed the way people who work at grocery stores. They're non-union workers who are happier with their lot in life than the unionized workers at a Kroger or an Albertsons or a Wegmans or whatever. And also, I like to use Whole Foods as an example of, if you like Whole Foods, it is built upon a whole series of libertarian or liberal ideas, and in the best sense possible, of things like free trade, of innovation, of experimentation, of allowing different types of people to express themselves. These are all good, wonderful things. And to go back to things like South Park and Rick and Morty, I mean, these are shows that are niche shows that would not have been possible in the old world of, 3 broadcast networks, even on cable, for instance. It's like it took a while for them to get up the cojones to offer niche shows. We live, in our cultural lives, in most of our work lives, certainly in our personal lives, I think, we live increasingly in a individualized and personalized world where from day to day, we learn new ways of thinking about what do we want, how do we define ourselves, who do we want to hang out with, and things that are going well. And it's only, in the world of politics where there does need to be a consensus, there does need to be some kind of, less fluid system in place. We can shrink that sphere of our lives down to the absolute minimum. And then in all cases, give people more freedom rather than telling them, we want to cut pollution, so you have to adapt this one piece of technology, even when there may be better ways to do it. Right. Or you have to take this subway and this highway, or you have to teach your kid this thing when they're 8 years old and this thing when they're 9. We can loosen that up. We can give, if we're going to give people who who can't take care of themselves, if we're going to give them money, we can tell them, here's a check for $100, spend it in the way that will best help you, as opposed to telling you, well, you can have skim milk and 2%, but you can't have whole milk because that, then you'd be a fat load and that blah, blah, blah. It's, pushing towards where things have gone well in our lives and kind of figuring out how to adapt that to the political sphere. And certainly just because I guess I feel like I'm purging here, in terms of foreign policy, I guess one of the things to think about is, the world can become more libertarian even if the LP never gets somebody in the White House or in a state house or anything like that. And in many profound ways, we're in the beginning stages of the end of the war on drugs. We have recognized alternative lifestyles in a way that was unimaginable even 10 or 15 years ago, where every politician now, including Donald Trump, nobody cares about marriage equality and things like that. We're going through, we're emptying the prisons, which is long overdue, and it's something that libertarians have been harping on since the buildup in federal prisons,
and something which we should take far more credit for.
Yeah, well, and also, and I was going to say in foreign policy, the basic libertarian message and vision of, we want a government that is strong enough, for an army and a military that is strong enough to defend us against attacks, but the idea that we are going to parachute in and that's putting it lightly, where we're going to dump millions of troops and, drop thousands of pounds of bombs all over the place and reorder the world doesn't work. Whereas we can actually have positive influence through things like trade and cultural exchange and allowing people to come here, and work and live and, either stay or go back. the past 20 years has been a referendum on a foreign policy vision that was shared equally by, Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives. And it's been shown to be not just wrong, but, immoral and awful and just, terrible. In my happier moments, and I guess, when the drugs are kicking in, or, I forget what year I'm in, the world is moving in many, many profound ways to a libertarian sensibility. And certainly, just to tie it back into kind of cultural stuff, because this is electric Libertyland and whatnot, when you think about the variety of, cultural goods and services that you can consume and produce, the way that you want, on the terms that you want, man, we are, that is something that, Hayek and Mises and Friedman and Rothbard and everybody else, they could not even imagine.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, without a doubt. The cultural reach. God, you just look at the basest offerings of, people that give makeup tutorials and have millions of followers and make millions of dollars on it.
I love that.
It's something inconceivable, and yet it is, to your point, it is here, and we are seeing that it's not a free market, but we are seeing a far more freer market of ideas that are then turned into a way to live and a very capitalistic way of working around, at least on the internet.
Yeah. A very, and individualist, and whatnot. So, so there's, I think, a lot to, let's put it this way, of the cultural arena, and there are issues there, but it's a place where libertarianism, I think, has essentially won, and it's a great place to hang out. Now we have to bring that same kind of freedom, decentralization, dispersion of knowledge, growth in self-expression and voluntarism, and cooperation to politics. It's a tough nut to crack, but I'm sure people younger than me will figure it out without any question.
People younger than me too. I'm too tired. Well, Nick, I know you got to run. I want to thank you for coming on. Of course, Nick Gillespie, again, editor at large at Reason and luminary in the Liberty Movement. So anything to tell people about? Obviously, you do your Reason interview podcast. You are still very active on Reasons with the magazine and the website. Yeah. You take part in the roundtable. What else can you tell the audience? Where can they find you and get more insights?
For me, it all begins and ends with Reason at reason.com. That's where I do a weekly interview podcast. You mentioned the Reason interview with Nick Gillespie. Recent episode, I talked to Rob Long, who co-wrote Cheers. He's a longtime contributor to National Review and other conservative publications, and a psychonaut. We talk about psychedelics and why he's into them. But you can find that at reason.com. The Reason Roundtable, a weekly Donnybrook among myself, Matt Welch, Catherine Menga Ward, the editor-in-chief of Reason, and Peter Suderman at Reason. That comes out every Monday. All of my articles are videos. Reason TV, I helped launch the video platform in 2007, so 13 years ago. That is up and strong. Again, everything you can find at reason.com. I'm really active on Twitter. My handle is my name, Nick Gillespie. But I'm always happy to push people to Reason. We are one of the last places that has unmoderated comments as well. So, and that was an ideological decision that we made back in the very late 90s and have stuck with. And
I love it. I swear to God, there's a lot of articles. I'll go down the rabbit hole, and some of them, I'll yell at the screen, but I get on the rabbit hole reading those comments. It's very entertaining. It's thought provoking. I'm glad that you decided to take that policy.
Thank you.
All right. Well, once again, thanks so much for joining me. And I hope you will join me again sometime. This was a lot of fun.
Same here. I really appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right. Thanks. Talk soon. All right. That will wrap up my interview with Nick. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I had a lot of fun. The time really kind of sped by there. I wish we could have gotten into even more stuff. There were a lot of things that he said that I wanted to talk more on, but I just one of those things when someone that has an interesting take is talking, it's hard to interrupt them because you also want to see what they're going to be saying next. So I had to go against my base instinct of always jumping in. And you guys who have seen me drunk know that instinct all too well. And I'm sure it'll be on display during our Drunken Democratic debate recap show, which will be airing tomorrow. Anyway, awesome to have Nick on the show. And by the way, in case you guys don't know it, I actually do a recap show for every South Park episode, every Rick and Morty episode as well, with good buddy Dan Smots over at the System is Down podcast. But that is for our Pride members only. So if you want to listen to those, go to patreon.com/Lions of Liberty. It's a hell of a show. Speaking of good shows, guys, make sure to listen to Mark Clear on Mondays. He has had Nick on before as well as Matt Welch, which I mentioned. But check that out on our Lions of Liberty flagship show every Monday. I, of course, am on Wednesdays, and then Felony Fridays with John Odermatt, bringing up the rear, the old caboose. That's what we call him. That's what they call him in prison as well for different reasons. All right, guys, that's going to wrap it for the show. Thank you from me, Brian McWilliams. Thank you from the Lions of Liberty. And thank you from Electric Libertyland. Always stay plugged into Liberty.